So for the longest time, I never played Dark Souls. I actually borrowed the game from my cousin for a weekend. I got to the beginning, defeated the Asylum Demon, got jump scared by the Raven that carries you to Fire Link Shrine, got killed by some skeletons, and returned the game back. You can tell I really didn't get that far. But it was really around 2019 that I'll get reminded of the Souls-like games with Sekiro. I never really played it that year, but it was what got me at least intrigued by the games, as well as the fact that I also got Game of the Year. Then this year, Elden Ring came out and I began my playthrough of the games. But I didn't start with Dark Souls 1 or even Elden Ring because isn't it common sense to just play the first game that came out and not the newest one that's also extremely critically acclaimed? Hi, editing Solar here. I made this part right before the Game Awards happened and yeah, it was critically acclaimed that it also won Game of the Year thanks to Bill Clinton. I actually am pretty deep into Sekiro right now, but I started with a game that I was always interested in ever since I saw it. Dark Souls 3 is beautiful. I always wanted to play this game since I saw how much people have been praising it, and finally get to play it? Yeah, I agree. It's good. Really good, in fact. I was so invested into honestly about everything, it's not even a joke. I'm the kind of person who will latch onto one thing, make sure I understand every little last bit, and then be able to memorize that for about pretty much the rest of my life going forward. An example of that recently would be the Mega Man Zero videos I made. But out of every aspect of this game, which part did I love the most? Well, it's the boss fights. These boss fights are not only some of the most difficult, time-consuming, and rage-inducing fights that I've seen in the game, they are also some of the most well-made, satisfying, and some of the most fun boss fights I've ever fought in a video game. But which are the best and which are the worst? Well, I'm here to answer that. To start, this is mostly based on my second playthrough. That's where I got most of the mechanics down, like leveling up, weapon upgrading, all that kind of jazz. I'm also going to add the amount of deaths it took me to fight the boss, mostly for fun and also to show you how much I suck. Finally, this is only going to be about the base game bosses. I really want to talk about the DLC boss fights, but I have not gotten to the point where I wanted to go through them. Mostly because I really wanted to get this video out, and goddammit, I'm not waiting until 2023. Alright, with all that done, my name is Solar, and this is the ranking of Dark Souls 3 bosses. To start off our journey, we have an amazing tutorial boss, Iudex Gundyr. The biggest thing you can notice that's different from the past Souls games is just how much more fast-paced the game is. The first boss from the first game, Asylum Demon, is pretty slow, which actually fits the gameplay of that game. Iudex is fast and can hit hard. It helps the player to learn to dodge, pacing when to attack, and how some enemies can be parried, but I am awful with parrying. This boss also introduces the fact that every boss now has a second phase, adding a new attack or aggression, which really helps to make the boss dynamic. However, for Gundyr, it just turns him into a slow, sluggish beast. Yeah, going with that. This doesn't turn him into a second phase of a boss fight, more of just a sluggish enemy you'll encounter in the game. Even with that, Iudex Gundyr does a great job at showing players the faster pace of the gameplay and new additions to bosses. And I think it's fair to say, it's fine to add him in the B tier. Next boss is the Vort of the Boreal Valley, or as I like to call him, the dog of the Boreal Valley.
What the dog doing?
This is the first proper fight, and what a fight. Vort has a slow but heavy-hitting attack, coinciding with his massive body. It also leads to the fact that this boss is incredibly easy to damage and even dodge. But the real fight is when he hits the second phase. Vort will thrash his body all around the arena, charging at the player, and also shooting out Frostbite, which is a new debuff I think, which affects sprinting and dodging. Vort is a solid starting fight, but really lacks in the moveset and even the danger, says the guy who died to him once. With the beautiful soundtrack and the second phase attack, I think it's fair to place him at B. Nothing really much to add, it's just a decent fight. The next boss is one that gave me a pretty good scare when I first saw it because I didn't think it would actually be a boss, the Cursed Rotted Greatwood. Out of all the bosses in this game, this has the most unique way to defeat this thing. Instead of regularly attacking, you have to aim at the pustules that surround the body, from his legs, arms, and oh my, These areas don't need that much damage to be defeated, which is a good thing, because this first phase is not that fun, mostly because it includes enemies that can interrupt you during the fight. I hate this mechanic. I don't like it when there are enemies that are added to the fight just to make it more annoying. The second phase is a bit better, but it also brings out the weakest part of this fight, the extra arm that grows. There's nothing else that's added, and the arm can actually be deadly when he grabs you, but all the Greatwood does is get up and slam the ground. If this was all the boss did, I would have ranked this boss at D. But it also unlocks the ability to use boss souls for weapons and or items, so for that, it goes to C. At this point, there are some bosses you can fight for a future area to be unlocked, so this is where I add in that this is also how I personally play and which bosses I go through. So with that, we have the Crystal Sage. If I were to explain this boss, it would be, it's easy and hard. Easy because the Sage has pretty slow homing missiles, wave of crystals, and sometimes air attacks that don't really do much damage. I also said it's hard because the second phase has it summon copies of the boss itself and you can easily get overwhelmed. Which is also going back to being easy because each clone only takes one hit, and once you do that for every time the Sage summons them back, it gets hard, then back to easy. I really don't have that much to add about this. It's nothing bad, but it's also nothing that helps makes the fight unique. So I guess C works for this boss? Yeah, why not? After that, we have what originally hooked me into the game, the Abyss Watchers. One of the Lords of Cinder. This fight, man. I love it. My first time fighting the Watchers was bad. I only had 4 Estus flasks. I didn't use the undead bone shards for the better Estus heals. I never upgraded my weapon, and I barely got to the second phase before I died. I don't know how I got that far, but I did. Now, actually knowing how to play the game, this is one of my favorite fights. The boss starts with the main guy, but then adds a second watcher that can be killed, but also resurrects after a while. Then a third one appears, and it can aggro to you or the boss. I said during the Greatwood fight that I don't like adding enemies to a boss, but this is that gimmick done right. Mainly that it begins as a fair fight, but adding in the other watchers makes it more chaotic. But it's with the second phase where this fight just goes from great to phenomenal. It's almost like the opposite of Gundyr, where the first phase did a great job at showing a fight, but got gutted by the second, more clunky phase. Here, it starts chaotic, but then continues to a smooth fight and one of the coolest second phases in the game. The Watcher now has a flaming sword and can leave behind flaming trails with most attacks, and that soundtrack, it's perfect. The absolute genius part to make the second phase more calm, reflecting the one-on-one battle. It's an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack. The Abyss Watchers, yeah, they deserve an S ranking. The only thing I can somewhat nitpick is that you can parry and backstab the boss pretty easily, but once again, I suck at parrying, and it is kind of difficult to get the backstab. Other than that, one of the highlights of the game, and there are many more to come. Behind the Crystal Sage's arena, you get a new path where you can travel to the cathedral, and the boss of the area needs to be defeated to continue the game later on. The boss is the Deacons of the Deep. This is the multiple enemies as a boss, but done right. The way to damage the boss in the first phase is to find the demon that's glowing red. Any of the deacons, especially the big guys, can glow red, and that is how you deplete the boss's health. Second phase is where the fight can get somewhat difficult. Now with one boss to attack, you think you'll be able to attack that and just get it done, right? Well, you can, but there's an attack where some deacon can summon this kind of spell that will insta-kill you. And you have to balance this mixture of making sure you don't wipe. I literally just said that like I'm just playing Destiny right now. You basically have to balance if you're gonna have to kill the boss as fast as you can or take it slowly. Out of every boss in the game, I could say Deacons is one of, if not the easiest fights in the game. Even with that, the fact that it can make a fight with multiple enemies work, I'm fine with giving this boss a C. It's still fun, and at the end of the day, that's all I could ask for. So you know how I said Deacons of the Deep was the easiest fight? I actually lied. It goes to this guy, High Lord Wolnir. But at least he has a decent jump scare.
Hello, Mario.
Jokes aside, I think this is the weakest fight in the game. He has a fantastic design and a really cool concept with the arena getting smaller and smaller the farther he goes in. But the boss fight itself is just so meh. All you have to do is destroy his bracelets and that kills him. He can spawn skeletons, spew gas, he's just not fun. And the worst part? I somehow died to this guy like 4 to 5 times. And to say I'm disappointed is an understatement. I'm just gonna place him in D. Other than a great design, I do not like this fight at all. Up to this point, the bosses felt pretty balanced to where they were located in your journey. But the next boss is, in my opinion, one of the hardest bosses in the game for me. And what once started as hatred, later became love for one of my favorite bosses in the entire game, Pontiff Sulyvahn. The build up to the boss already told me I would not be able to win. Pontiff has an aggressive moveset where he can go from stab to multiple swings with limited time to try and dodge. He even has some attacks that looks like it would be a regular slash into a heavy slam. The most dangerous attack of his is the stabbing, with it being able to deplete almost your entire health. Oh, you think that's bad? The second phase says otherwise. He summons a clone, but unlike the Crystal Sage, it has a health bar and can be resummoned even after it dies. The second phase is both easier and harder than the first phase. Harder because, look at this! But also easy because the clone will usually replicate the boss's attack, so you'll know how to dodge when needed. This fight took me so long in my first playthrough. I have it on screen earlier about how many deaths it took me in my second playthrough, but the first time I got through it, I feel like I just wasted all of my ember. It took me so long that when I finally killed him, I literally turned into that one guy who got super emotional beating that geometry dash level. I wish I could say I was lying, but this was literally me. It's crazy to think this is one of the most difficult bosses in the game, and that in early development, FromSoft had Pontiff as the final boss. After all of that complaining / praising, Pontiff Sulyvahn goes to the S tier. Absolutely fantastic design from character to fighting sequence, a true test of your patience and strength, and that second phase theme, oh my god. It should pretty much be blatantly obvious why he's at S. Instead of heading to the next boss, we can actually go back before High Lord's Arena and break the bridge to head to the Smoldering Lakes. We got fire crabs, a big old bow that's always aimed at you, and Zol? Okay, I'm getting off topic. The main thing of this area, other than the bone shards, is the old Demon King. So demon bosses outside of Asylum Demon have not been received very well. But here we have a surprisingly good fight. The Demon King mostly relies on fire attacks, with him also using his club to attack us normally, but also using it to summon swarming fireballs. He's surprisingly tough, which is odd considering he can be axes right before High Lord. There's also that little bit of lore that I like about him. I didn't want to talk about the lore for most of these bosses, mostly because I would be gushing over Pontiff for the rest of my life. But here I found it very interesting. While there are other demons roaming around the place, like the one you fight with Sigurd and the one above the place on Fairkeep, which also did this to me. But for all of that, the old Demon King is the last demon, and it shows with his desperation. The final attack has the king release all of its energy and it just sits there. I didn't really feel good finishing this guy off. The Demon King is a tough but well balanced fight with a great arena to move around avoiding attacks. So with that, I'll give him a B. I think that's a good placement. Under the Erythil City and past the worst location in the game, I'm being serious, I hate this place, we head to the profaned capital. While a very underwhelming area only having 2 main points, we head to fight one of the Lords of Cinder. Originally a very disappointing fight, but with doing a quest with this Onion Man, aka Sigurd, we get something surprisingly okay. Yorm the Giant. Out of all the bosses in the game, this was one of the most disappointing. Which is unfortunate because Yorm has an amazing design and has a great meme, but he's just not that great. The only way you can damage him is with the Storm Ruler, which is actually a weapon from Demon Souls, for some reason. The weapon arts is that it shoots a massive strike of air to knock over Yorm. That's it. You have no other way to actually damage him. I mean, you can, but you really shouldn't. While having Sigurd is awesome because this is the only fight you can have another NPC to fight with you that isn't summoned, but also great story-wise, as he was the only person other than Yorm's people to be trusted and handed a weapon if he were to be consumed. The satisfaction of fighting him wasn't there, so only because I like the story and Onion Man is the greatest person ever, Yorm the Giant goes into C. One of the biggest surprises for me was Anor Londo. Like I said, I never played Dark Souls 1, but I knew about Anor Londo and how beautiful it was. Here, however, everything is bad. The giant is dead. Instead of knights, they're deacons for the cathedral. There's a lot of sludge. In the main part of the area, which is the arena where you fight Ornstein and Smough, I believe, you find Aldrich, who has the powers of Gwendolyn. Yeah, that Gwendolyn. Outside of the well done surprise and genuinely creepy design of Aldrich, I was very negative about this fight. This is the most passive fight, and because of Aldrich's body, he's one of the easiest bosses to attack. His attacks, however, still infuriate me. The main attack is where he just walks around the room launching small magic projectiles, which is whatever. He could also launch a bunch of arrows which spread out a lot, so it can be difficult to dodge if you don't immediately run to his side. The second phase has him just increase the attacks of his past moves, but the arrows now home into you, and he can also launch missiles, which is the worst attack because you could pretty much be stun locked, at least if you're like me. He also has a scythe that can heal him if you get too close. At the beginning, I really never liked this fight. Now I just see him as okay. Creepy design, great build-up, and a great use of the Moonlight Butterflies theme. Maybe later on I will change how I feel about Aldrich, but for now, he ranks at C. I guess he's better than Yorm. Depending on which boss you defeat at this point, you get teleported back to Lothric Castle. The lady that gave you the banner at the beginning dies, and as you get to the statue behind her, you get a boss that I did not expect at all. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley. This boss is one of the most anxiety-inducing bosses in the game, and I love that. Her attacks are very unpredictable thanks to her unnatural movement. She can also grab you and nearly insta-kill you. There's also this small detail that I like, that anytime she attacks with the fire sword, any of the pillars around her start to go on fire. I think that's a nice detail. The second phase is just as horrifying as the first, mainly because she summons a dark sword and begins with one of the hardest attacks to dodge with how long it goes on. She also amplifies her other attack, using her dark sword to plunge it to the ground and cause a double slam of dark energy over some over-the-head attacks. This boss is tough. There are also two things I want to know about this fight. First is the fact that in the beginning of your playthrough, you can kill the old lady and fight the dancer then and there. I don't know why you would do that, but there's the option. The second thing is the score. That haunting choir makes this boss feel just as creepy as it is. Adding on to the fact that in-game the only other thing you hear is echoing steps from the dancer, it's creepy and I love it. The dancer was a fight I never knew existed, and it gave me a good shock seeing her intro for the first time. She has such a unique fighting style with a fantastic setting, and the fact that you can fight this boss super early into the game, I'm giving the dancer an A. I really debated on either A or S, it's that good. On the left of the Lothric castle, you can head to a hidden boss where you see what I first thought was a naked rat, but it's actually Osiris. Hold on, I'm gonna look this up.
Osiris.
You know what? I'm just gonna call him Osiris. Osiris the Consumed Rat. This boss really felt like it belongs earlier in the game, due to how simplistic his attacks are. In the first phase, all he does is swing his staff and spew the frostbite effect. He also talks a lot, which is kind of odd considering he's one of, I believe at this point, 2 bosses that actually speak to you. The second one being something you'll find later on in the game.
Dear little Ocelot, where have you gone? Are you hiding from me?
The second phase starts with him disconnecting his child from life. After that, it turns more into a wild animal fighting you. Creatures like dogs are my least favorite enemies in the game, due to how unpredictable they can be with their attacks. I can't believe I'm complaining about an animal fighting like an animal. But with this boss, it just feels so, honestly chaotic, but not even in a good way. I think this fight would work if the attacks were a little bit more easily predictable, like the spinning slash and the flying attack, and if it was a fight you could fight earlier in the game. I wasn't sure where to place Osiris, but surprisingly, I think B is a good place. This was definitely a tough placement for me to try to choose for him. Behind the boss room of Osiris, you find a secret location, which I'm not really even sure what it's about. The sun is gone and you see the worst enemy in the entire game. Heading to where Eudex was, we find Champion Gundyr. One of the, I wouldn't say disappointing, but lacking parts of Eudex was that the second phase turned into a slow boss. Here, Champion Gundyr is the hard mode version of this fight. First phase is the same as Eudex, but he's a lot more faster hitting. Then when he has around 80% of his health left, I would say like 75, he just becomes angry. He goes berserk. Like the man is able to jump like 40 feet tall with all that armor just to slam you. This man is tough. Even with the last few bosses left, Champion to me is one of the hardest and also the most aggressive boss in the game. His attacks are very heavy hitting and very fast. The main challenge of his fight is to find a balance of dodging / using your shield, attacking, and healing. You will be punished if you're either too aggressive or passive. But the best thing about this fight is that it's a simple 1v1. There's nothing absolutely absurd other than his 40 feet jump or something that has a lot more spectacle. It's just one dude fighting another dude. Champion Gundyr took what worked with Aldrich and made it into one of the most challenging bosses in the entire game. For doing that, and also because Gundyr herself is a Chad, he goes into the S tier. Out of every boss in this entire game, this was one of the toughest to rank. The Dragonslayer armor. I say this is the toughest to rank, not because the fight is bad. Oh, absolutely not. This fight still has what makes a Dark Souls fight great. It's just that we've had so many great fights up to this point, Dragonslayer usually gets forgotten. It sucks because this is a great fight. One of the main aspects of this fight is what are apparently called butterflies in the second phase, where they can actually attack with the players with lasers and whatever this is. The boss itself is also one of the tankiest bosses, with the largest shield a boss has and a surprisingly quick moveset. He can slam and slash at you, slam his weapon to make an electric area effect. The second phase has him use more of his electricity in his attack, and also one of the hardest hitting attacks, which can either be a full-on lunge or wind blade thrown at you. Dragonslayer has a lot going for him, which for the most part gets overshadowed by the other bosses. But one thing I'll say doesn't get much appreciation is the atmosphere and score. I absolutely love the more orange skybox with the eclipse in the background, as well as being surrounded by the butterflies during this fight, and that score is perfect. After thinking where to place the Dragonslayer armor, I think it's fair to place him in A.
Oh dear. Another dogged contender. Welcome, unkindled one, purloiner of cinders. Mind you, the mantle of Lord interests me none. The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords, let it all fade to nothing. You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
The last of the Lords of Cinder is undoubtedly the best of the four we can fight, Lothric and Lorien. I hated this boss in my first playthrough. The teleporting, the attacks, and that awful area before the boss arena, which still sucks. But as I got better, this boss became my second favorite fight in the entire game. Despite the fact that he's crippled, Lothric is very mobile, and as I said, can teleport around the arena during a combo. I say he's like Champion Gundyr, where the attacks can be quick and devastating, and added in that you have to dodge at the perfect time to not get hit by his longsword. He can also charge up a massive slam, which can be pretty difficult to dodge. As Lothric's health depletes, the second phase starts, where Lorien comes to revive Lothric's and gets a piggyback. There's no other way to say it. The fight gets a bit tougher due to Lorien's magic, and the main gimmick now being to kill Lorien, because if you kill Lothric again, he will continue to be revived for an infinite amount of time. The thing that makes this fight amazing is the way it's balanced with Dark Souls 3. Past games allowed a large amount of freedom from what I know with which bosses you can fight. Dark Souls 3 is more linear, which leads to less freedom with which bosses you can fight, but it means that the main bosses have all been balanced to be consistent with each other. Lorien and Lothric are an amazing fight and serve as a perfect penultimate fight to the game as a whole. Oh, and of course, that score. Not only just the first phase, but the second phase makes it my favorite track in the entire game. And yeah, they go into the S tier. Probably the one boss that I absolutely knew would always be in the S tier, no matter what.
You remain among the accursed.
I said that Lothric and Lorien are the second to last fights in the game, which is technically true, but there are 2 secret fights in Archdragon Peak. The first boss you'll encounter is one of the most disappointing bosses in the entire game. The best thing is your first time going through this fight. You aren't entirely sure how to defeat the boss as it can barely be damaged. So you run across a gauntlet of the worst enemies in the entire game, and the boss only needs 1 plunging attack to kill. 1! This sucks! Cool spectacle, but that doesn't save it from the fact that this boss ranks at an F, the worst boss in the game, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. How funny is it that we go from the worst boss in the game to one of, if not the best? Once you ring the bell at the end of the level, the whole place gets covered in a storm. You can walk on these clouds, which, sure, why not? And through the fog wall is one of the most iconic bosses in the game. This is the Nameless King, undoubtedly the hardest boss in the game. The first phase is mostly against this dragon bird thing. Its attacks are slow yet very devastating. The Nameless King as well can launch lightning strikes at the player and swoop in to attack you with this sword. The worst attack is the fire breath. You have to run as soon as the dragon begins to fly up or you will get hit. Heck, I feel like I am very far away most of the time, but I still get burned. It's kind of annoying. The first phase is solid with only a few nitpicks of some attacks. However, the second phase is what everyone knows more about. The cutscene that plays routine has the king kill the dragon to use its power, and we begin the real fight. And what a fight. The most undoubtedly difficult part of this fight is dodging his attacks. His moveset is one of the trickiest, yet most fair moveset in the entire game. I said champion how do you find a balance with attacking and healing, all that stuff? Well, that's the king, but 10 times more. You need to dodge at the right time. Not too early, but not too late. He can severely punish someone who isn't paying attention to his moves, because it can either be 1-slash, or a 3-slash combo, air attacks, lightning strikes, or an aerial plunge. Whenever I die to this boss, which is a lot as you see in the counter, I feel like it's fair. This is the most fair fight in the game, as it has you use everything you have learned up to this point to defeat him. And when you do, oh, it's a fantastic feeling. My only legitimate criticism I have is the camera on the first boss. For the most part, the camera does a great job at tracking enemies and bosses on the past, but here it constantly breaks on the target and it gets really infuriating. Even with that, the Nameless King, without a doubt, deserves to be in the S rank. This is it. With all the lords killed, we can place their ashes on their thrones, and we head off to the kiln on the first flame. With the beautiful skybox and arena, we face the final boss of Dark Souls 3, the Lord of Cinder. This isn't just the final boss of the game, it's the final Dark Souls boss, and it does not disappoint. The main aspect about the Lord in the first phase is that it's an amalgamation of the past people who have linked the flame, which has to attack similarly to players using multiple weapons like a staff, spear, sword, summoning magic. It's like going up against a player in Invasion, except this time Invasion does not suck. This boss has it all, adding in the delayed attack so you have to dodge at the correct time. It amps up one of the most varied fights in the game, but it doesn't end there. Once the boss reaches low health, it begins phase 2, but something is completely different, and I'll just let it play. Yes, it summons the power of Gwyn, the king who linked the first flame, the one who started it all. As if the fight couldn't get better with this happening, the theme uses the same notes from Gwyn's fight from the first Dark Souls game, and it's brilliant. The second phase is slower, but it still has some amazing mechanics. It has lightning strikes, a crazy to dodge sword combo, a flurry of lightning bolts. This seriously feels like a final boss. I truly don't have anything else to add. This is fantastic. This is a fantastic final boss for a fantastic game, and it absolutely deserves the S rank. And that's it. All of the base game bosses of Dark Souls 3 have been ranked. I can't describe how much I just love these fights, and I have come to understand why people love these games. Depending on how things go, I definitely want to try out the other Souls games, but if that doesn't happen, I hope you still enjoy this ranking. If you have a different ranking of these bosses, please do let me know. I'm genuinely curious on what other people think. Anyways, I hope you all have an amazing day.
Do you remember me? Yes. Let this be a lesson for you.